Hey guys, so today I'm going to be doing a video about speed or velocity, whatever you want to call it, and I'm just going to be saying some things that are really annoying that people will say all the time, and I just find it really annoying and I want to correct them, so this video is going to be about that. So, first off, just give you an example. If you're driving your car, okay, you're going to tell me a speed, like if I say how fast are you going, you're going to say 60 miles per hour, okay, you're on the highway. And then you don't tell me this speed is relative to the Earth, but really it is. You're measuring 60 miles per hour relative to the Earth. If there's another car driving next to you and also relative to the Earth is doing 60 miles per hour, you could say I'm going 0 miles per hour because relative to the other car, you're doing 0 miles per hour. So this brings me to my first point, is that speed is relative. You need two things for one of them to have speed. Okay, you need your reference thing. So this is the thing that you basically assume to be still, assume to not move. And then you have the thing that you're measuring its speed, and you're measuring its speed relative to the other thing, okay? So if I am in a universe where nothing exists, literally nothing, it's a complete vacuum except me, can I have speed? Not really, because there's nothing else to measure it reference to, right? I could be the reference point for something else, but there is nothing else, and nothing else can be the reference point for me, so I can't have a speed. Like if it said speed, there is no speed. It doesn't make sense. It's not a logical question because there's nothing to measure the speed relative to. And people will assume that, like, oh, well, you could be flowing through space, but space isn't a thing. You can't assume space is a reference. There's no, like, invisible lattice like in a video game where there can be an invisible lattice throughout the whole game that you can tell your speed. Space isn't like that. Space is an abstract idea, not a thing. So you can't move relative to space. It has to be relative to an object. So most of the time people assume Earth, right? If you're walking, I say, how fast are you going relative to the Earth? And then they'd be like, well, 3 miles per hour. You know, or if we're both walking next to each other relative to me, you could be doing 0 miles per hour. If you're walking slower, -1 miles per hour, you're moving backwards, right? Or actually, it'd really be 1 miles per hour because you can't have a negative speed, but that's not an issue I find with speed generally. So that's, you know, speed is relative, and it's like people don't assume this. They think that, like, either they usually assume the Earth to be their reference, and then if I told them that relative to you I'm going 0 miles per hour, if we're both walking next to each other at the same speed relative to the Earth, that means we'd be going 0 miles per hour relative to the Earth. So they say, no, I'm really actually moving 3 miles per hour, but no, you're actually moving 3 miles per hour relative to the Earth, but you are actually moving 0 miles per hour relative to me. And so this is just something I find weird, is that humans always assume the Earth to be their frame of reference. And why they don't assume themselves to be their frame of reference, I don't know. Perhaps it doesn't work out logically in your brain. But think, if you're walking and you hold up your hands like this, right, and you keep your head perfectly still, what's going to move? Your hands? Are your hands moving, or is the rest of the Earth moving past you? You'll notice that it seems like the rest of the Earth is moving past you, because relative to yourself, you never move. It's not like your feet are going to be 10 feet behind you. You, relative to yourself, don't move. And I know that doesn't make sense, but it's like your hand is a separate thing from your other hand, and they can move like this, but they can only move, you know, your arm span apart. So yes, I am sort of guilty of saying me relative to myself, which, as we know, you need two things relative to speed, but your feet relative to your eyes, which is what you see the world with, your main sensory input, don't move. So, or they move just a little bit, very, very small. So it'd be simpler if people assume themselves to be a reference frame, because that would mean the Earth would move past them. You could basically say, well, I never moved in my life, the Earth just moved past me, and it makes a certain amount of sense. You could also say I moved past the Earth. That's perfectly logical if you assume the Earth to be your reference frame. And then when you start talking about space, people assume the sun to be a reference frame, and they're like, well, no, the Earth is really moving. But then if you ask them if they're walking, they'll say the Earth is perfectly still. And that's logical because, you know, they changed their reference frame to the Earth to the sun. Why they do that, I don't know. Because if you take the Earth as your reference frame, the sun orbits the Earth. The rest of the planets will still orbit the sun, but the sun will orbit the Earth if you take Earth as your reference frame. But most people say, no, that's bogus. The Earth orbits the sun, and that people assume the sun to be the reference frame. So if you measure the speed of the satellite relative to the Earth, the satellite will speed up and slow down on a yearly schedule, because if we measure relative to the sun, the satellite will move at a constant rate and the Earth will be moving like this. And so if the satellite's going this way and the Earth is going this way, satellite's going to appear to move slower. Now, if the Earth is doing this and the satellite's doing this, they're moving away from each other, and it's going to appear to move faster. But if you're taking the Earth as your reference frame, you would have to conclude that the satellite is speeding up and slowing down. And people will say, well, no, it's not actually speeding up and slowing down. It's moving at the same velocity through space. But like I said, that doesn't make sense. You can't move relative to space. There's nothing to be relative to. It's just an abstract idea, space. You need a physical object like the Earth, the sun, yourself, a chair, what have you, my camera here, anything like that. So and this brings me to sort of my second point that I've been alluding to here for a few minutes, is that there's no perfect reference frame. Like, people can say, well, really, actually, you're moving like this? There's no really, actually. Its speed is all relative to something. There's no perfect thing that we can measure speed relative to that never moves relative to something else. So it's like people assume that inside space, like I said, there's this perfect lattice that we can measure speed to. There really isn't. And they assume that there's this like perfect reference frame that everything else moves relative to, but there really isn't. And so, people will say, well, can't your satellite be moving relative to this perfect reference frame? It doesn't exist. It's not possible. The laws of physics prohibit a perfect reference frame from existing through space. Okay, so it's not possible. You can't say, well, really, actually, you're moving at this constant rate throughout space relative to the perfect reference frame. It doesn't exist. You just have to pick the best reference frame for the job. So usually if it's your car or yourself that's moving, you're going to usually pick the Earth. If it's a satellite that's moving, usually the sun will make the most sense. If it's a galaxy that's moving, maybe another galaxy, you just have to assume the best reference frame for the job. There's no perfect reference frame. And so, that's really my point, is that there's no perfect reference frame, and speed is completely relative, okay? So speed is completely relative, and there's no perfect reference frame. So people get that through your heads, okay? There's not a perfect reference frame to measure relative to. If you find one out yourself, please put it on YouTube, because all the scientists in the world would be very happy. So, why am I talking about this? Well, because in particle physics, because, I like particle physics, mostly I've just been talking about classic Newtonian physics, relativity gets a bit weird. Like, you would expect, right, if I am going light speed and someone on the ground, so if I'm running at light speed, which I wish I could, but I can't, and someone on the ground turns on a flashlight or a laser, we'll say a laser, the second I get to them and it releases its first photon at the exact same time that I get to them, how fast will the light be going relative to me? Now, what you'd say is, well, relative to me, the light shouldn't be moving because it's going light speed and I'm going light speed. Wrong. The light would be going light speed relative to me and light speed relative to the person on the ground. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because you say, that doesn't make any sense. You're going light speed. But if somebody on the ground shines a laser at the same time that I pass them, that laser light is still going light speed relative to me, even if I'm going light speed. So light goes light speed relative to everything. Okay, assuming we're in a vacuum, I'm not going to get into like slowing down through air and stuff, but light goes light speed for everybody in a vacuum, no matter what your reference frame is. So perhaps, while most people will disagree, light could actually be a perfect reference frame. A photon will always go the speed of light relative to anything. So you could sort of assume light to be your perfect reference frame. And now, while this gets complicated, it's not a bad idea. That's why distances are determined by light, okay? A meter is defined by the speed of light. So that's something also to consider with relativity, is that it doesn't really apply to light or even near light speed things. It just doesn't work, because light will go light speed relative to everything in a vacuum, no matter what you're doing. Okay, so that's something else. But just remember, there's no perfect reference frame unless you could consider light a perfect reference frame, and speed is completely relative. So thanks for watching, and sorry if I haven't posted videos in a few weeks, because I was on vacation, and then there was I had a few issues with my backyard, namely this. So but I'll be making videos now for another week, and then I'll be on vacation. So thanks for watching.